Hello, I'm Charlie Newton, and this is Conversations. Thank you for joining me again. Today we have a very special guest, my friend, Dr. Chandra Ward, uh, professor of sociology at UTC. How are you
Hello.
doing today, Chandra?
I'm doing very well. It is a beautiful fall day here in southeastern Tennessee, and I'm enjoying it very much.
Awesome, awesome. Glad that you could join us today. First, let's start off by just tell us a little bit about yourself, your history, your background. Where
I'm a native of Atlanta, Georgia. I was born there. Um, However, I did grow up as a child in Southwest Georgia. I lived with my grandmother between the ages of 9 months old to 9 years old, where we stayed in South Georgia. Um, and then I returned to the Atlanta area to live with my mother. After that, I pursued my undergraduate degree at the University of Georgia. Go Dogs!
that's
And
blasphemy in Tennessee. Yeah.
yeah, who
Okay.
knows?
Yeah.
In a few weeks, I might not be able to walk around with my Georgia regalia
Oh, you
on.
cannot walk around with that today. So
I
I'm
might
just
not.
warning
There's
you.
an important game coming up in a couple of weeks. I got my eyes on it. And yeah, studied at the University of Georgia in Athens, and after finishing my undergraduate degree, I was interested in becoming an activist, whatever that meant. I was trying to figure out like how do I become an activist? And I had the opportunity to train as a community organizer in Dallas, Texas. So I moved out there, not knowing anybody. And then I moved to Austin, Texas. I stayed there for a few years working with nonprofits, being involved in the activist community there. I then returned to Atlanta and pursued my PhD there and was offered a job at UTC and moved to Chattanooga to accept that position. And here I am.
But that's fascinating. How do you, as a female, as a woman, young lady, graduating from, so you got your BA from,
University of Georgia,
and your PhD from,
Georgia State.
okay, deciding to go to move all the way to Texas by yourself, not knowing anybody. What gave you the courage or the inspiration to do that?
Um, I think that is just something that's a part of my personality. I am adventurous, I suppose, and I like exploring. I love to travel. I live for traveling, um, and I just wanted to try something new. So yeah, I didn't even have a car at the time. I drove myself in a U-Haul, put my few belongings on it, and just drove uh, out I-20 west to Dallas, and called my contact, and they arranged for me to live with somebody who um, had opened up their house to other uh, wayward exploring youth who were a part of this organization. And then, I mean, with this person, they ended up starting a nonprofit in Austin and was like, hey, do you want to just throw your stuff on the U-Haul and come with me to Austin, which led me to Austin. So I, at least as an adult, I'm not sure that I've always been this way, but just I'm open to exploring. I'm interested. I'm curious about the world. Perhaps that's what makes me a good sociologist. I'm very curious about the world, and um, I guess I know how to survive. So you just figure things out. So
You know, a lot of people would be afraid, man or woman, to go somewhere they've never been before, you know,
oh, I
and
mean,
to start a new life.
yeah. Well, I saw, when I was in Athens, it's not a very big town. It's smaller than Chattanooga, so it kind of felt like after I'd been there for 4 years, 4.5 years, that the degrees of separate it seemed like 1 degree of separation. Uh, it felt like I knew not everyone there, but people that I knew knew other people that I knew, and so on and so forth. So, and I had an internship in Atlanta, but there was nothing really set. I had no commitments, so I was open. I had no responsibilities besides myself at the time. So that was the perfect time. And I mean, I look back at community organizing in Dallas and what we were asked to do. I would go to and knock on strangers' doors, ask them to invite me into their home in Dallas at night sometimes, oftentimes. And when I look back on that, I'm just like, wow, that's kind of wild. But again, it somehow set me up for where I am today. I've had a lot of jobs where I'm interfacing with people, where I'm, trying to get strangers to be willing to talk to me, to listen to me. So that I feel like kind of paved the way for what I'm doing today.
Well, that's powerful. You're very courageous.
Thank you.
That takes a lot of courage. Oh, by the way, I do have a connection with the University of Georgia.
All right.
Yeah. Were you there? What years were you there? The 90s or what?
Oh, you're asking me to give away state
Okay,
secrets.
okay, well.
No, I'm just kidding.
I'm so old. I don't know.
Yeah,
Anyway,
late 90s, early 2000s.
okay, I was there a little bit before you. I wasn't actually there, but in the mid 80s, I participated in their studies abroad program.
Oh.
And Wadsworth Gerald was a painting professor. He's one of the founders of AfriCobra. So I ended up being his assistant in Italy.
That's great.
And a painting that I made in Cortona was purchased by the University of Georgia and is hanging somewhere at the University of Georgia. So that's my connection to the University of Georgia. Yeah. I went there once and had a bad experience one night with a state patrolman. But anyway, it worked out okay.
Good.
But so that's my little connection with the University of Georgia. I was thinking about community organizing and the nonprofit world. Do you know what it was like being in the nonprofit world? Because I'm sure that you guys needed to do a lot of fundraising and things like that. Did you participate in any of that stuff or promoting the nonprofit that you worked in?
I was very young at the time, and I only made it to kind of entry level positions.
Okay.
The organization that I worked with in Dallas, it was community organizing, and so we relied heavily on the communities that we worked with, and
Okay.
that was challenging because we worked with working class, low income
Right.
communities of color. If we weren't, canvassing in upper class neighborhoods, and admittedly, that is not a strength of mine, fundraising.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So and then
You don't think so, but I think anybody can fundraise.
Oh yeah, okay. And I worked for like a larger kind of institutional nonprofit, like the food bank in Austin, Texas, which had a lot more kind of prominent donors and support, and so I was not in charge of fundraising. Other people were, but we had a variety of events that were a part of fundraising.
So you were more of an on-the-ground soldier then? Is that?
I get,
would you
yeah,
say?
actually, yes.
Yeah. Okay, that's intriguing to know that. So how do you go from that to an institution like UTC? How do you?
Well, my desire to first become an activist, my senior year in college, was out of the desire to do something to help people. That's something I've always wanted to do. An old high school friend had reminded me of that. You always need somebody from your past who can remind you of things that you've just, forgotten.
Right.
And she was like, you've always wanted to, she was like, I remember you telling me in high school, like, I just want to help the people. So
Yeah.
that's my high school me saying, like, I want to
Yeah.
help the people, but I don't know what that looks like.
Right.
And so I had thought about, while I was in college, a career in law. I had taken some law classes. I realized I don't think I can read all of this dribble for several years. I mean, legal texts are just really dry, in my opinion. And I had, at the time, there was the WTO protests in Seattle, and I remember like hearing about it and listening about it, and was just curious about activism. And there were a lot of different things that I was very interested in. And I saw this ad in the school newspaper about being a community organizer, and I followed up on that and met with someone at Clark Atlanta, and that's what led me to Dallas. But I didn't know what that looked like. Like, what is an activist? And I think, I mean, still to this day, that can be sort of a question where you might receive a variety of answers depending on the person. But certainly, part of that is community organizing, and I got a dose of that in Dallas. That was definitely one of the hardest jobs I've ever had. And after that, I worked in the nonprofit world, again, motivated by this desire to ultimately help people, marginalized folks in particular, because, I mean, that's the background that I come from. That's the world that I live in. But especially growing up, after I moved with my mother had me as a teen, so that's probably why I did not stay with her as a young kid. And then she was in a position to take care of me. I went, with her to Atlanta, but I experienced great poverty. Like, my grandmother wasn't rich. She was a housekeeper for this white family, but I had all my needs met. When I lived with my mother, things were a lot tenuous, a lot more tenuous.
Mm-hmm.
Not having money to make ends meet. My mom expressing whether or not she'll get pulled over because she couldn't afford to keep her insurance. So being afraid when we're driving in the car, like, are we going to get pulled over? Is my mom going to go to jail? Is my mom going to go to jail for this check that's going to bounce, but we need groceries at the end of the month? Not being able to participate in arts. I was in drama class in high school, and we were going to take a trip to see Les Miserables. And I didn't ask my mom for the money because she was very vocal about what we did and didn't have. And it was the end of the month, and I knew that we didn't have the money for me to go to see Les Miserables. So I didn't ask her, and so I didn't go on this full trip. So there are a lot of things that I missed out on, and I was very aware of living on the margins,
Right,
financially, and so I think that made me aware at a young age of inequalities, and while that was something I tried to hide in college because I just wanted to fit in, and most of the people I went to college with were come from privileged backgrounds. As I got older, I begin to accept and embrace where I came from, and that being a point of strength in talking to other people, who, and again, especially students who are first generation, for example, I can tell them
Right.
about my experience. I can tell
Yeah.
them about, what I just relayed to you. There's a young kid in my gen ed class who asked me about, like, what do you mean?
What is Gen Ed?
General education. This is
Okay,
something
okay.
that all students have to take. Oftentimes they're freshmen, but he asked me to give examples of how poverty is criminalized, and I was able to easily draw from my experience of being with my mom of, like, because she can't afford insurance, we
right.
have to drive around. She's afraid that she might be imprisoned if she gets caught driving without insurance, or in prison for trying to get groceries on a check that might bounce, might not bounce. All of these things are essentially, she would become criminalized as a direct result of her poverty.
That's interesting because when you think about that, poverty being criminalized, make me start thinking about our culture and how the dominant culture is set up. And we was talking before about how when we started our nonprofit, and even to this day, I feel that we don't really fit into the nonprofit world as far as what they expect out of you, how nonprofits are run. If we ran our nonprofit the way a lot of other nonprofits are run, I wouldn't want to do it because it doesn't take into consideration our culture, how we do things.
Right.
For instance, we grew up, my family, in the church, as a lot of African Americans did. So there's a certain way the family, the church family, and your family operate, and the way that we survived worked. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I'm real keen on survivals, if you can imagine. I went to UTC, actually. I'm an alumnus of UTC.
Okay.
I went there in 1971. And
Wow.
yeah, right.
It had
Yes,
barely been desegregated
right.
at that time.
We was the second group of African Americans to attend that school. So we faced all type of, I faced
Oh, I'm
all
sure.
type of things. But survival tactics. And as an artist, as a black artist, I had to learn survival tactics as well. So I used those survival skills that I learned growing up. I grew up over here on the west side, in the projects. And then we moved to East Chattanooga. We lived in a house, but still we were poor. And we learned these survival skills that I actually put into SPLASH to help these kids grow really fast and quick, and to teach and to consider who they are and where they are. And I learned early on that as we're trying to attract funding from foundations and people like that, it's like we're speaking a different language. If SPLASH was run the way a lot of nonprofits are ran, we would not be making the impact that we're making right now. And it would be evolving. We watched other organizations in the country, and especially like in Nashville and the South, that started out like we did, but ended up being something else. And even in Chattanooga, there have been some great organizations and schools and things that were started, but it has ended up to be something else. It's not us, basically. So I don't know if you've experienced that, say, going from your activism to working in, like with the food bank. That's a different type, I think, of activism. And then there may be a different approach to engaging the community. I'm not sure.
Institutions are very horizontal, or I'm sorry, vertical, And I think going from grassroots organizing, it's a little bit more horizontal as opposed to vertical, top down. And so
Right.
that's, what you're dealing with in institutional settings is, in a place like UTC is very bureaucratic, very, top down. And, sometimes these different entities aren't necessarily communicating or on the same page where it is more of a, or feels like at least more of a collective effort on the other end with activism. I'm curious, actually, what exactly would you say makes Splash Arts different from some of these other organizations that you've been
I'll
talking
give you an
about?
example. That was when we first started Splash, we set out to try to find other organizations that looked like what we wanted to be. And so we found one in Nashville. It was an art school. Do you remember the name of that?
I do not. I do not.
Okay. So yeah, I have to. My wife is behind the camera for everybody. She's doing all the producing and everything. But so they started out with the same. Well, they wanted to reach black kids with arts, just that simple. But it ended up not exactly, after a few years, maybe 8 or 10 years, I'm not sure, I don't remember. I haven't thought about this for a while. It ended up not actually reaching the kids that they were founded to reach. But they were reaching more youth, reaching everybody, but they were not solving, in my opinion, the issues or the problems that they were founded to do. And so I'm very protective of our organization, that no matter what, that because we're doing it the right way right now. We're doing the work correctly, that it don't grow to be so big that now all of a sudden, our community falls out the bottom.
Right.
Yeah, that's basically what I mean.
Okay.
Yeah, because I think a lot of times with nonprofits, the idea is like the more the merrier.
Right.
Like you said.
All,
Like you said.
all about metrics and what
Yes.
have you.
Right. And sometimes it don't. So it may not matter to some of these foundation people what this family may be dealing with. For instance, they don't have transportation. They're going to be hungry this Thanksgiving. Things like that. All of this can come together to it can be addressed by us somehow. Before COVID, we made sure that every child was fed.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. So feeding a child was very, very important. Just talking to them or listening, more listening than anything else. Allowing them to grow at their own speed.
Excuse me.
And in the arts, it's like this. There's so much disrespect for the arts. It's kind of like the outcome can't just be art. Did they go to college? Did they do this? Did they do that? Did they get a good job? Whatever. The outcome is that they had an art class. That's the outcome we're interested in.
Yeah.
That they could sit down for 2 hours and be creative and actually grow and learn something on the inside. So that's what I'm dealing with in my mindset. When I look across even our city, I don't see any of the other nonprofits actually meeting the need that I believe our nonprofit is meeting through the arts.
Funding agencies, going back to the metrics thing, they want to have what they define as some big impact, and there's some things that you can't necessarily measure. Exactly, there's some things that you cannot necessarily measure that count as impact, but that's not valued.
Yeah.
And I some of the things that I found in my career, whether that be in academia, outside of it, is that we define what's valuable differently, I remember.
Can I cut you off? Right
Yes,
quick?
please.
Because I don't want to lose my thoughts.
Yes, I know. I completely understand that.
I was just reminded that what you did with that student.
Yeah.
Lose my thoughts?
Yes, I know. I completely understand that.
I was just reminded that what you did with that student is so important.
Oh, thank you.
That happened to me when I was a student at UTC. I was it may have been a sociology class, kind of think of it. And I was telling my professor that UTC was racist. He didn't believe me. And I think I was probably making a C or D in that class or something like that. But he told me that, okay, if you can prove to me that UTC is racist, I'll give you an A for this class.
Wow.
So I set out
Wow.
to prove it. And what I did was, I did a survey of every black UTC student on campus, because I knew them all, you know. And we had all these names, did this survey, and came back to him in a week or two, you know, with the whole 9 yards. I got an A in that class. There's something about that personal eye to eye. Okay, I feel you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's so important that a student see themselves
Yeah.
when they look at the professor. That's another thing that SPLASH offers. Now, when we go into these schools, we're in a couple of elementary schools now, and we were this summer as well. And when I see all these black kids with nothing but white teachers, I know that their culture is not being promoted, or you know, I know that there's something missing. Mm-hmm. And when they see when a black man comes in,
As an artist, you know, where do we see people who are, I guess, defined as artists, you know, in our communities? Where do we see art in our communities?
right?
You know,
Yes.
and then to have a black person, a black man, you know, who is a successful artist. I mean, that's I would say priceless, just to have that experience. I know growing up, I do not recall personally ever meeting a Charlie Newton coming up in any grade, not even in college. So
Yeah. That's something that even in your history, you know, there was like a dearth of visual, at least visual stimulation. What is that a good word to use?
Yeah. Visual artists. I mean, you know, I knew there was a guy who taught, you know, African drumming on campus, for example, and you know, there is the you know, choir at church and so on and so forth. But visual arts, I do not recall any in much of my life.
Okay.
So yeah, for students to have that exposure, and I do think connection is very important. I hope to illuminate things for, you know, students who aren't of color or come from impoverished, marginalized backgrounds. I hope to connect and support students, first generation especially, who can hear and see some of their lived experience sort of articulated, expressed through me in the subject matter that I teach.
So what is sociology?
Sociology is the study of society, whether that be on the macro level, so institutional level, social structures, or on the micro level, so social, you know, interaction, and how, I mean, essentially our interactions help to create a larger society, right?
Right.
And so just examining many facets of that, even at the meso level, the group level, not to be confused with social work. My family thought I was a social worker for many years. My mom, like, up until like a few years ago, she'd be like, "Oh, you should work at this hospital," and I'm like, I'm not qualified. I'm not a social worker. So yeah, it is definitely something that most people don't know exactly what it is, but we
Right.
we live it. Sociology is all around
Is there a
us.
connection between sociology and philosophy?
Oh yeah, yeah. And I mean, we draw on sociologists draw on some similar thinkers.
Okay.
And certainly, drawing from the European tradition, and I do explicitly say that as a disclaimer in class,
Right.
like, just so you know, this is a European perspective, not that this didn't exist in other places, but, around this thinkers around the Enlightenment,
Okay.
coming out of Europe, that serves as kind of our sort of classical theorists that we engage with, that they're all kind of inspired by one another.
So is the study of sociology, for the most part, Western?
Oh yeah,
Okay.
I would say so.
Okay. Okay. Is it possible, do you ever, or how uh, does, say, African or Eastern thought uh, relate or contribute to the study of sociology, or does it? Do you know, what do you do with Africa? What do you do with the South? So how does that
Well,
work? I don't know. So,
sociology is kind of has its disciplinary roots in Western Europe,
okay.
and then more modern roots in the States. And I
Okay.
would say that, and I don't know if it's like this for other disciplines, but sociology is a very Western, and I
Okay.
would even say, maybe even a American dominant discipline.
Okay.
There are sociologists all over, but honestly, it may be kind of, you have American/Canadian sociology existing in a particular silo, and then the Europeans are doing their thing. And honestly, unfortunately, I don't know a lot. I mean, besides maybe Asia,
Right.
depending on your topic of study, to be
Okay.
honest.
Okay.
And so, since it is American focused, a lot of things such as urban sociology, which is what I study, is driven by American trends and what have you.
Okay, so it's driven by these trends. When you study the history of sociology, so it's going to start in Europe, right? It's going to begin in Europe.
Yeah.
So before Europe, I mean, what about, say, prehistoric or
Oh,
Neolithic?
I have no doubt that, I mean, so at its essence, as I said, sociology is the study of society. We have
Right.
people in studying society, since, the first humans, absolutely. All you have to do is be an observer, or at least that's the start, is being an observer
Okay.
of your surroundings.
Right. Okay.
But in terms of um, kind of specific disciplines, and this may have been sort of a colonization, if you will. I mean, we know that math began in the Islamic world, and then, I'm sure, I mean, and math is just such a different kind of animal anyway, maybe colonized by, that Islamicist history is largely lost unless you're going perhaps into like really pursuing math in sort of a higher level. And honestly, I'm sure a lot of these other disciplines have been colonized, or ideas have been colonized, and then maybe sanitized in the process of, like, we're going to have these like concrete disciplines,
Okay.
and this is here are their
So
definitions,
that's
and
the
so on and so forth.
university, the idea of the university, or the, what's it called? A certain type of education.
Right.
Right. Well, that's interesting. So, is archaeology important to your discipline at all, or is that